This episode of Stories from the Hollow is brought to you by the Dalton Historical Society and Whispered Myth Studio.
Do you remember the clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoing through Bailey Hollow? The laughter of children playing by the creek? The stories whispered on porch swings as the sun dipped below the hills? These are the echoes of our past, the tales that built Dalton, the memories that shaped Bailey Hollow. For generations, these stories have been passed down like cherished heirlooms. But now, for the very first time, they've been captured, bound within the recordings of our new podcast, Stories of the Hollow. Join us as we unveil the history of our beloved town, a journey through time, a celebration of our heritage. Hear the stories as they were meant to be told. Discover the lives that paved our streets, the dreams that built our community, in Stories from the Hollow by the Dalton Historical Society. I'm Bill Guest with Doug LeCaux, who is the owner, actually co-owner because I think your son is involved with you, correct?
Yes.
Of the Dalton Do-It Center.
Correct.
Which used to be called Dalton Lumber, correct? But
Right.
we'll get into that.
Right.
But first, you had mentioned that the LeCaux family has been in the United States since, I think, the 1700s. Is that
Correct.
right?
That's correct.
And you told a fascinating story about a young man who brought that heritage to the United States. Can you fill us in on that?
Well, from what I understand, and in the LeCaux book, that's what, in the 1700s, it's all stories and things that people find in their attics and basements, and they bring them up. But yeah, he was, from what I understand, like an indentured servant, bought by a ship captain from his mom, and sailed to the United States, New York City.
From France, correct?
From France, yeah, from France. And then was sold off the ship to a merchant in Pittston, Pennsylvania.
And how did he spell his name, Doug?
L-A-Q-U-E.
As opposed to how you spell it now.
L-A-C-O-E.
Right.
Yeah. And that's where it all started with us and the family. And it's grown to be 9 greats. There's 9 greats in there, and there's a lot of family that maybe is gone and we don't even know about. But right now, we have a pretty good-sized family.
We'll have a future podcast on the LeCaux family. I didn't realize how much grist for the mill there is on that subject. Yeah. But right now, we'll talk about the Dalton Do-It Center. What is the history of the Dalton Do-It Center? It did start as Dalton Lumber, is that correct?
Dalton Lumber, and it started in downtown Dalton at the old red building that's, I guess it's considered a storage unit, an office building. And the name of Williams was the name of the gentleman that owned it. And then, from my knowledge, Mr. Chapin, Scott Chapin, that lived in Dalton.
Do you know the years for Mr. Williams?
No, I don't. I don't know how far that goes back.
That's okay.
Yeah, and what the family is. There is some family still around that I know of that once in a while somebody will be in the store and say their great-grandfather was part of Dalton Lumber in the beginning. And no, I'm not sure of the years what that's about. I only know that would have been in the 80s, that the gentleman that bought the building where we are today, when he bought that, it was pretty much junk. You could look in the front door and look right through the back of the building.
Is that so?
Oh, yeah. That building was pretty trashed. And the one guy that I don't know if he actually owned it or leased it, was going to recycle tires. That was a big thing, and there was a lot of tires in the building that had to get taken out and destroyed. And but no, then Mr. Chapin in 1989, it was reopened and reinvented to what we have today, which is the old building underneath there. That's kind of why we got here, was they saw the old brick when it was uncovered. This is probably the 4th time that it's been renovated into a hardware store lumberyard.
You mean where you are now?
Where we are today.
Mr. Williams owned it first?
He owned it in
but
Dalton.
It was the red building.
That was the building in Dalton, yeah.
And then a fellow named Chapin purchased it from him.
In Dalton.
In Dalton. And then you came along?
About 30-some years ago, I came along for Mr. Chapin. He actually had renovated the building where it is today.
What building now are we talking about? The one that you're currently in?
They're currently in, which
Okay.
is the electric, Waverly Electric or whatever you want. There's a couple different names, I think.
How did it go from the red building that you were talking about to?
Size. It's just the location. He wanted a better location and a building that you
Mr.
could grow
Chapin
with.
did?
Mr. Chapin, yeah, because he owned that. I don't know when he actually purchased it, but he was a contractor, and then he bought it and went into the lumber and hardware business.
So he moved it from that red building that you're talking about
In downtown Dalton.
in downtown Dalton up to where the power station used to be.
Yes.
And how did the name change occur?
Well,
and why?
It just kind of snuck in there because when it moved from Dalton to where it is today, downtown Dalton to today, it was the Do It Center. We had to do it. It's a franchise, like McDonald's, Burger King. The Do It Center is a franchise.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's 4,000 stores. A little bit of knowledge. Last year, Do It bought True Value, and now we're 8,000 stores. They're still named True Value, but last year True Value got in a little financial difficulty, and we had the means as far as franchisees and a company to buy them. And that's what they did. So there'll be 8,000 stores. Gaze, Justice, True Value, all of those stores will be Do It Centers in a year. They can keep their name for a year and decide if there's other like Ace and other hardware companies out there than us. So, but Do It has been around 80 years, and they're a good company. I bought the franchise, I think it was probably 97 or 98, and had it ever since. And they're good to work with. Our representative was at the store today checking out the new store and what we've renovated. So, yeah,
Was it basically a hardware store when you bought it?
No, it was all lumber. It was lumber and construction materials, and that's grown, as well as everybody wants to do their own deck, pour their own concrete, find different means to do things. And we do see there's not as many carpenters as there was 15, 20 years ago.
That's interesting. So you've noticed the changes in customer preferences and in purchase trends over the years that you've had it, right?
Correct.
What about customer preferences? Have you noticed any changes in that over the years?
Yeah, a little bit. Like I said, the home shows and the shows that are on TV of home repair and rebuilding, you could do it yourself. The do-it-yourselfer is probably one of the best customers because they'll look at things and try to figure them out, and then you give them a little help, and they're on the road. And they'll be customers forever.
More so now than, say, when you first bought the store?
Correct. Yeah. It used to be you'd get a call Monday morning. I need something done. Can I get a carpenter to call me? And you'd ask 3 or 4 guys to call them. Nowadays, it's the customer shows up and they're doing their own thing, which is good. We like that.
You're making major renovations, at least to the exterior of the building. Can you talk about that and tell us why and what you're doing?
Well, it's part of the company, part of your franchise is that they'd like you to kind of keep up with certain ways. You could have a mom and pop hardware store with a sign out front and be a Do It Center, but there's certain sizes and classifications, and you just try to keep going. They changed 13 years ago our beautiful orange building, which was mine and purchased all that. I kind of like that, but then 2 years ago, my son went to the hardware. We go to 2 hardware shows a year for Do It Best. And he said, Dad, they've changed the colors, they've changed the design, and they changed the paint department, and all of that. It's your business. It's your money. It's your business. So you change things and you try to keep up.
So that's why the changes that are occurring?
Yeah, and just to make it more modern, maybe just, change the front, change a little bit of the look. It's good. It's good.
You have an historic building there. I believe it used to be the power station for the Northern Electric Railroad. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's a big, solid building. We won't cut any windows through the outside wall. The walls are 22 inches thick. The floors are 22 inches thick. When we say we renovated and moved, Easter Sunday I was in there jackhammering holes through the floor for new areas and new wiring to get into the basement. The building is as solid as a rock. A lot of the stuff from when they produced electricity is no wiring and anything like that. It's been stripped out. People have stolen most of that. But if you go in the basement, the fireplaces are there where they made steam. The pillars are there where the generators were hooked to, and they're still there. They're concrete pillars. Of course, the generators are gone. Above the attic, in the upstairs, there's a lot of glass insulators like you see along the railroad, but these are giant ones, metal frames. We don't send people up there. You can't walk up and look at it, but in the basement you can. And even owning the building 30 years, I've never been in the lower basement.
Never?
Never. I shined a flashlight in. I had the local conservancy go down there, and they came in, and the guy wanted to go down. I said, "You go down. I've never been there." He turned around and came back. Pretty scary looking down there.
Now, did you encounter any discoveries while doing this work?
Oh, yeah. There's a bunch of offices in the lower, not the lowest basement, the first basement, and we found where the guys must have ate their lunch and stuck a newspaper up, and there'll be like a chunk of a newspaper
with dates on them, Bud?
With dates, or you'll see like a tricycle for 10 cents. I don't. If you could find the dates, it'd be really neat. Not a lot of anything that would be good or anything that somebody would want. But yeah, and it's a pretty cool building. It's neat to be in there, and it's kind of scary. I've had employees that won't go in the basement.
Is that so?
There's a standard basement, then there's the lower. The lower, nobody goes in, and nobody's been in there. I blocked it off.
Really? Does it give them the chills or what?
Gives me the chills.
Does it really?
Yeah. Well, there have been people that, when this building was abandoned,
right,
and before the owner that bought it, Mr. Chapin, bought it, they've had people commit suicide there. A guy drove his car in, hooked his exhaust pipe up, because the old building is sturdy enough to put it. And the front doors, where our front door is, you could drive right in there. And they found people with the guy committed suicide in there. And yeah, it's a little scary. That's why I said we had the Dalton. My wife was there. What was the name of Berger's company?
You're thinking of the guy who did the ghost hunting?
Yeah, the guy that did he had all kinds of stuff, and I don't know if he ever found any in there, but it
Is that why he opened it up there?
Not really, no. He was a friend of my son's, and we let him have a little office space to put his junk in.
That's
whatever
interesting.
you want to call that, but yeah.
That power station was responsible for introducing electricity to Dalton.
To Dalton and the Waverly, the railroad, the
right.
trolley,
the
trolley that ran through there, which if you look at any of the literature that we have or is around the book, they picked up milk. They took milk to Scranton daily or weekly for the farmers and everything else, and it's a pretty neat process.
And it was sold to the Abington Electric Company in 1929, just to give an idea of what kind of time period we're talking about here.
I think it was started in 1909, didn't I see?
The railroad was founded in 1904, and the power station was about 1909.
Yeah, that's...
How do you see your company's importance to the growth and development of Dalton and the surrounding region?
First off, I'd like to say I hope it's here the next 100 years.
Right.
And things keep the way they are. I think it's good we're far enough away from all the big boxes in the city. The people that we have as customers are very loyal. They they keep coming in, and contractors that can get things in a hurry, and we stay there. But yeah, I'd like to see it stay. My son's 47 years old, at least through his family or however far it goes. But I'm pretty happy with it, and yeah, I'm proud I have a son that is in my business. I'm lucky that way.
And I'm sure he's proud of you too.
Well, there's days he hasn't been too proud. But we get along very well.
Well, that's true for any father and son, I think.
We get along very well. And he's taken in the business, and proud of him. He does a great job for us. So.
In a future podcast, we will talk about the LeCaux family.
Okay.
Which I think is probably a story with far more interest, certainly for me. So I'm looking forward to that one. Doug LeCaux, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
What do you think, guys? Okay?
That's good.
Sounds great.
What did they use the lower basement for?
I'm guessing the water from the creek behind it was brought in to make steam that powered the generators. And, not knowing the whole history of what happened in the building, one of the saddest parts of that history, and Cresswell Drilling, that's right, our neighbor, and they're good customers, and I'll say friends of ours, one of their family, when the electric plant was in service, was fishing in the creek, and they let steam out, and he was killed right there behind the building. And it's as far as Scott Cresswell that owns Cresswell Drilling, I'm not sure if it was his father's brother or his father's brother, how that falls into place. But yeah, he was burnt severely back there fishing. Yeah. That concrete pillar is still back by the creek. It ran underground. There's large pipes that come in there, and they're blocked off with concrete now. But I think that's where the water came in, and there was probably pumps. But like I said, I shined a light, and that's as far as I went.
I remember the dam being there as a kid, and we would go fishing on the dam. But they weren't producing electricity then. But I think that's still a transformer plant, isn't it? The electric plant next to you, and they don't produce it, but isn't that where the feed for Dalton comes from? The next to you?
Oh, the power station.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah, and probably other place. Yeah, they just rebuilt that.
Yeah, that's a transformer plant. And as a kid, we would always say, well, no matter if you're listening to the radio, WRM or WSCR, when you get to the corner, you won't hear it because the radio cuts out there for about a minute when you go around that corner.
Yeah. And that probably wasn't there in the beginning when this was a working plant.
No.
It might have came later because I think the power that was generated there went the other direction.
Yeah, there's two feeds into Dalton. You're right about that.
And that was where the coal pile, once they got away from wood, which the burners that are there was coal brought in, and they dumped rail cars there. And that was at the far end of the building. Mr. Brower, Norm Brower, was a good guy. He'd come up and sit with me and tell me about the building a little bit. And some of the stuff I know today came from him because he did a lot of history work and I think some books about Dalton. Yep. But Norm was good man, good guy.
Yeah, he wrote a book about Dalton's history, and he also wrote a book about the Northern Electric Railway.
Yeah,
There was another hardware store in Dalton, the Westcott's Hardware Store, which is the building that they're renovating cat-a-corner from the Bailey's now. That was a big hardware store, which went out of business before that.
Really? I didn't.
Yeah, that was the lumberyard when I was young was mostly a lumberyard. The real hardware store was in that building. It was Ivan Westcott and his son, and it was. An old hardware store with oiled floors. And as a kid, my father would give me 25 cents to go down and buy half a pound of 10-penny nails.
Yeah,
and
there you go.
It was loose screws, loose nails. Yeah.
I should mention too that these comments are coming from Jeff Cornell.
Very interesting though. I learned a lot.
And that Westcott hardware store was across the street.
Cat-a-corner, like the
Bailey's
was here, and then across Main Street was the Norm Brower building, and then across Mill Street was where the hardware store was.
Right.
because I'm from Dalton 100 years ago, and I lived away in Montrose for a long time. And then when I moved back again, was when the business, and I knew Scott Chapin, and somebody said, well, Scott Chapin bought that. And then I would hear, and I must have been talking about your son, Scott, and I was confused. I didn't know who was whom. When was that? When did you take over from Scott?
Well, in '94 is when I think he hired me, and his wife had cancer, and she was very sick. And he said she only had 6 months to live. Can you come? He knew me from I worked at Whipple's at another lumber yard in Clark Summit as a truck driver and then manager. And he knew what I had done, and he pretty much hired me on the spot and said, come to work. And then 2 years later, he made an agreement with me to be a partner in the ownership. And he was very good to me.
That's interesting. That's something we did not get into before
ownership.
You bought the store. Would you just go through that again for me? What did you do before you bought the Do It Center?
Well, in 1971, I was a truck driver for Whipple's. You had to fail your draft. I failed my draft physical, and Whipple's hired me as a truck driver, and then a manager or a salesman, and then as a manager. And I moved out of here. I went up to Sayre. As a kid in 1976. I didn't know where Sayre was, but I went up there and was there for like 8 years, and then ended up moving back here. Left Whipple's and. Just a lumberyard salesman for Mariotti Lumber, an old lumberyard, and then ended up with Scott. And
how did that happen?
I just walked in one day to buy lumber. At 7 in the morning, he had opened the doors. I was the first customer, and he knew me from when I was a truck driver for Whipple's. And he said, hey, I need you. And I said, you need me? And he said, yeah. He said, I just found out yesterday my wife, Fran, is very ill with cancer, and she wasn't going to make it. 6 months to live. And that was the 4th of July I started in '94. And between Thanksgiving and Christmas, she did pass away. And then a couple years later, he made a partnership agreement and said, if you stay here and keep working, it'll be yours. And it was. He was very good to me. I was very lucky.
Thank you.
And now my wife and I say, why did you ever do that? But no. And now for my son and everybody else that's involved, we're lucky. Very lucky.
Episode of Stories from the Hollow is brought to you by the Dalton Historical Society and Whispered Myth Studio.